Hi, everyone. It's Janae here. Hello. Hi. Janae's here. So I'm reading this book. Here it is. It is Alice's Adventure in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. So I am on chapter 4. And so I am going to pick up where I left off. Here, chapter 4. The rabbit sends in a little bill. So this is where I'm going to start today. So some of you may notice my glasses. They're different. So I got a new pair of glasses and I just picked them up today. You guys also might notice the background. I'm actually in my bedroom. And so it's a little different for the background. But I'm ready to get started. So I plan to read, let's see, 1, 2, 3. So probably 3 chapters. I'll try to read 3 chapters here. So if you have your books, you can go to chapter 4, which is found on page 31. If not, just listen. Feel free to type in the chat. You can say, hello, I'm here. Let me know that you're here. I'll start by saying hello. All right. So chapter 4, the rabbit sends in a little bill. All right. So it was the rabbit. So last time I read, there was someone that was coming and Alice heard the person coming and it was the rabbit. So now the rabbit's in the same place as Alice. Alice was by herself. She chased all the animals away. So like the duck and a couple other birds, mostly birds. She chased them away. The turtle, she chased away. The mice. So because she mentioned her cat, how her cat likes to chase mice and it just kind of scared them. So all the animals went away. And so Alice was left alone. And then she heard someone coming and she was hoping that it was going to end up being like the mouse or whatever, but it wasn't. So here's a picture of the mouse that she chased away. So the mouse swam away and then the mouse came back and then it swam away again and it didn't come back. So Alice was hoping that it was the mouse coming back, but it wasn't the mouse, it was the rabbit. So I'm right here on chapter 4. So chapter 4, it's the rabbit sends in a little bill. So it was the white rabbit trotting slowly back again and looking anxiously about as it went, and as if it had lost something. And she heard it muttering to itself, the Duchess, oh, my dear paws, oh, my fur and whiskers. She'll get me executed. As sure as ferrets are ferrets. Where can I have dropped them, I wonder? So the mouse is looking for a fan that he dropped and also something else that Alice picked up. Let's see. Oh my goodness. I think I wrote it down. Let me look and see if I wrote it down in my notes. All right. Okay, so the rabbit is looking for a fan and white gloves. All right. So he's crying out, the Duchess. Oh, my dear paws. Oh, my fur and whiskers. She'll get me executed. As sure as ferrets are ferrets. Where can I have dropped them, I wonder? Alice guessed in a moment that it was looking for the fan and a pair of white kid gloves, and she very good naturedly began hunting about them, but they were nowhere to be seen. Everything seemed to have changed since her swim in the pool, and the great hall with the glass table and the little door had vanished completely. Very soon the rabbit noticed Alice as she went hunting about and called out to her in an angry tone, "Why, Mary Ann, what are you doing out here? Run home this moment and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan. Quick now." And Alice was so much frightened that she ran off at once in the direction it pointed to, without trying to explain the mistake that it had made. "He took me for an housemaid," she said to herself as she ran. "How surprised he'll be when he finds out who I am." So the rabbit thinks that Alice is the housemaid, Mary Ann, but she's not. And she's just going along with it. So, but I'd better take him his fan and gloves, that is, if I can find them. As she said this, she came upon a neat little house, on the door of which was a bright brass plate with the name W. Rabbit engraved upon it. She went in without knocking and hurried upstairs in great fear lest she should meet the real Mary Ann and be turned out of the house before she had found the fan and gloves. How queer it seemed, Alice said to herself, to be going messages for a rabbit. I suppose the I'll be sending me on messages next. And she began fancying the sort of thing that would happen. "Miss Alice, come here directly and get ready for your walk. Coming in a minute. Nurse, but I've got to watch this mouse hole till Dana comes back and see that the mouse doesn't get out. Only I don't think," Alice went on, "that they'd let Dana stop in the house if I began ordering people about like that." By this time, she had found her way into a tidy little room with a table in the window, and on it, as she had hoped, a fan and two or three pairs of tiny white kid gloves. She took up the fan and a pair of gloves and was just going to leave the room when her eye fell upon a little bottle that stood near the looking glass. There was no label this time with words, "Drink me," but nevertheless she uncorked it and put it to her lips. "I know something interesting is sure to happen," she said to herself, "whenever I can eat or drink anything. So I'll just see what this bottle does. I do hope it'll make me grow large again, for really, I'm quite tired of being such a tiny little thing." So my nose is kind of running a little bit, so I'm going to grab some Kleenex. But I want to talk about that because Alice usually does things that are intelligent. Like she likes to think things through and she likes to follow directions. But this time she's just doing things on her own. So nobody told her to do anything. And she just took it upon herself that she's just going to drink this because usually when she drinks something or if she eats something, then something magical happens. But she didn't get directions this time and she's just going and doing her own thing. So hopefully it's not poison or it's not a curse or it's not something horrible because nobody told her to do anything. But just food for thought while I go get some Kleenex for my nose. I'll be right back. All right, so I'm like on the side of my bed, sitting on top of pillows for more comfort. And I have my Kleenex with me. So what do y'all think is going to happen to Alice? You can type in the chat what you think might happen. Do you think she'll stay small? We'll have to find out. Oh, sorry. My pillows are like sliding different directions. So I'm trying to sit comfortably. All right. So there was no label this time with the words "drink me." But nevertheless, she uncorked it and put it to her lips. I know something interesting is sure to happen, she said to herself, whenever I eat or drink anything. So I'll just see what this bottle does. I do hope it'll make me grow large again. For really, I'm quite tired of being such a tiny little thing. It did so indeed, and much sooner than she had expected. Before she had drank half the bottle, she found her head pressing against the ceiling and had to stoop to save her neck from being broken. She hastily put down the bottle, saying to herself, "That's quite enough. I hope I shan't grow any more. As it is, I can't get out of the door. I do wish I hadn't drunk quite so much." So there's Alice. There's her head. She's bending her neck. She's too big to fit through the door now. So this is not good for Alice. Alas, it was too late to wish that. She went on growing and growing, and very soon had to kneel down on the floor. In another minute, there was not enough room for this, and she tried the effect of lying down with one elbow against the door and another arm curled around her head. Still, she went on growing, and as a last resource, she put one arm out of the window and one foot up the chimney and said to herself, "Now I can't do no more, whatever happens. What will become of me?" Luckily for Alice, the little magic bottle and had now had its full effect, and she grew no longer. Still, it was very uncomfortable, and as there seemed to be no sort of chance of her getting out of the room again, no wonder she felt unhappy. It was much pleasure at home, thought poor Alice, when one wasn't always growing larger and smaller and being ordered about by mice and rabbits. I must wish I hadn't gone down that rabbit hole. And yet, it's rather curious, this sort of life. I do wonder what can have happened to me. When I used to read fairy tales, I fancied that kind of thing never happened. And now here I am in the middle of one. There ought to be a book written about me. That there ought. And when I grow up, I'll write one. But I'm grown up now, she added in a sorrowful tone. At least there's no room to grow up anymore here. But then Alice, shall I never get any older than I am now? That'll be a comfort. One way, never to be an old woman, but then always to have lessons to learn. Oh, I shouldn't like that. Oh, you foolish Alice, she answered herself. How can you learn lessons in here? Why, there's hardly room for you, and no room at all for any lesson books. And so she went on, taking first one side and then the other, and making quite a conversation of it altogether. But after a few minutes, she heard a voice outside and stopped to listen. Mary Ann, Mary Ann, said the voice. Fetch me my gloves this moment. Then come, a little pattering of feet on the stairs. Alice knew it was the rabbit coming to look for her, and she trembled till she shook the house, quite forgetting that she was now about 1,000 times larger than the rabbit and had no reason to be afraid of it. Presently, the rabbit came up to the door and tried to open it, but the door opened inwards and Alice's elbow was pressed hard against it. That attempt proved a failure. Alice heard it say to itself, then I'll go out around and get in the window. Get in at the window. That you won't, thought Alice, and after waiting till she fancied she heard the rabbit just under the window, she suddenly spread out her hand and made a snatch in the air. She did not get hold of anything, but she heard a little shriek and a fall and a crash of broken glass, from which she concluded that it was just possible to have fallen into a cumber frame or something of the sort. Next came an angry voice, the rabbit. Pat, Pat, where are you? And then a voice she had never heard before. Sure, then I'm here, digging for apples. Your Honor, digging for apples indeed, said the rabbit angrily. Here, come and help me out of this. Sounds of more broken glass. Now tell me, Pat, what's that in the window? Sure, it's an arm, Your Honor, he pronounced. It's arum. An arm? You goose. Who ever saw one that size? Why, it fills the whole window. Sure it does, Your Honor, but it's an arm for all that. Well, it's got no business there. At any rate, go and take it away. There was a long silence after this, and Alice could only hear whispers now and then, such and sure, I don't like it, Your Honor, at all, at all. Do as I tell you, you coward. And at last she spread out her hand again and made another snatch in the air. This time there were two little shrieks and more sounds of broken glass. What a number of cucumber frames there must be, thought Alice. I wonder what they'll do next. As for pulling me out the window, I only wish they could. I'm sure I don't want to stay in here any longer. She waited for some time without hearing anything more. At last, voices all talking together, she made out the words, Where's the other ladder? Why, I hadn't to bring but one. Bill's got the other. Bill, fetch it here, lad. Here, put 'em up at this corner. No, tie them together first. They don't reach half high enough yet. Oh, they'll do well enough. Don't be particular. Here, Bill, catch hold of this rope. Will the roof bear? Will the roof bear? Mind that loose slate. Oh, it's coming down. Heads below. A loud crash. Now who did that? It was Bill, I fancy. What's to go down the chimney? Nay, I shan't. You do it. That I won't. Then Bill's got to go down. Here, Bill, the master says you've got to go down the chimney. Oh, so Bill's got to come down the chimney, has he? Said Alice to herself. Why, they seem to put everything upon Bill. I wouldn't be in Bill's place for a good deal. This fireplace is narrow, to be sure, but I think I can kick a little. She drew her foot as far down the chimney as she could and waited till she heard a little animal. She couldn't guess of what sort it was, scratching and scrambling about in the chimney close above her. Then, saying to herself, "This is Bill," she gave one sharp kick and waited to see what would happen next. The first thing she heard was a general chorus of, "There goes Bill." Then the rabbit's voice alone, "Catch him, you by the hedge." Then silence, and then another confusion of voices. "Hold up his head. Brandy now. Don't choke him. How was it, old fellow? What happened to you? Tell us all about it." Last came a little feeble, squeaking voice. "That's Bill," thought Alice. "Well, I hardly know. No more, thank ye. I'm better now, but I'm a deal too flustered to tell you. All I know is something comes at me like a jack in the box, and up I goes like a skyrocket." "So you did, old fellow," said the others. "We must burn the house down," said the rabbit's voice, and Alice called out as loud as she could, "If you do, I'll set the knife at you." There was a dead silence instantly, and Alice thought herself, "I wonder what they will do next. If they had any sense, they'd take the roof off." After a minute or two, they began moving about again, and Alice heard the rabbit say, "A barrowful will do to begin with." "A barrowful of what?" thought Alice, but she had not long to doubt, for the next moment a shower of little pebbles came rattling in at the window, and some of them hit her in the face. "I'll put a stop to this," she said to herself, and shouted, "You better not do that again," which produced another dead silence. Alice noticed with some surprise that the pebbles were all turning into little cakes as they lay on the floor, and a bright idea came into her head. "If I eat one of those or these cakes," she thought, "it's sure to make some change in my size. And if as it can't possibly make me larger, it must make me smaller, I suppose." So she swallowed one of the cakes and was delighted to find that she began shrinking directly. As soon as she was small enough to get through the door, she ran out of the house and found quite a crowd of little animals and birds waiting outside. The poor little lizard, Bill, was in the middle, being held up by two guinea pigs who were giving it something out of a bottle. They all made a rush at Alice the moment she appeared, and she ran off as hard as she could, as soon found herself safe in a thick wood. So it sounds like, I just want to pause again. It sounds like Alice was like stuck in the house, and like the animals wanted to get her out, but like they wasn't able to get her out. And then eventually Alice found something to eat, some more cake, and the cake made her smaller, as she supposed. So she ran out of the house, and now, there's a crowd of animals. They're all like looking at her. And then Alice, it says that Alice is wondering something. It says, "The first thing I've got to do," said Alice to herself, as she wandered about in the wood, "is to grow to my right size again. And the second thing is to find my way into the lovely garden. I think that will be the best plan." So Alice is still small, so she's not her normal size. So when she was small enough to fit through the door, I think she was like 2 feet tall. So I think she's 2 feet tall again. So she's not her normal size, but she's not like a giant either. So it says it sounded an excellent plan, no doubt, and very neatly and simply arranged. The only difficulty was that she had not the smallest idea how to set about it. And while she was peering about anxiously among the trees, a little sharp bark just over her head made her look up at a great hurry. An enormous puppy was looking down at her with large round eyes and feeble stretching out one paw, trying to touch her. Poor little thing, said Alice in a coaxing tone, and she tried hard to whistle to it. But she was terribly frightened all the time at the thought that it might be hungry, in which case it would be very likely to eat her up in spite of all her coaxing. Hardly knowing what she did, she picked up a little bit of stick and held it out to the puppy, whereupon the puppy jumped into the air off all its feet at once with a yelp of delight and rushed at the stick and made believe to worry it. Then Alice dodged behind the great thistle to keep herself from being run over, and the moment she appeared on the other side, the puppy made another rush at the stick and tumbled head over heels in its hurry to get hold of it. Then Alice, thinking it was very like having a game of play with a car horse and expecting every moment to be trampled under its feet, ran round the thistle again. Then the puppy began a series of short charges at the stick, running a very little way forward each time and a long way back, and barking hoarsely all the while, till at last it sat down a good way off, panting, with its tongue hanging out of its mouth and its great eyes half shut. This seemed to Alice a good opportunity for making her escape. You think she's going to escape? So she set off at once and ran till she was quite tired and out of breath, until the puppy's bark sounded quite faint in the distance. And yet, what a little puppy it was, said Alice, as she leaned against the buttercup to rest herself and fan herself with one of the leaves. I should have liked teaching it tricks very much. If, if I'd only been the right size to do it. Oh dear, I'd nearly forgot that I've got to grow up again. Let me see. How is it to be managed? I supposed I ought to eat and drink something or other. But the great question is what? The great question certainly was what? Alice looked all around her at flowers and the blades of grass, but she could not see anything that looked like the right thing to eat or drink under the circumstances. There was a large mushroom growing near her, about the same height as herself, and when she had looked under it, and on both sides of it, and behind it, it occurred to her that she might as well look and see what was on top of it. She stretched herself up on tiptoe and peered over the edge of the mushroom, and her eyes immediately met those of a large blue caterpillar that was sitting on top with his arms folded, quietly smoking a long hookah and taking not the smallest notice of her or anything else. So This is a picture of Alice and the dog, and you can see that she has like a stick in her hand. You can see it's a puppy. All right, and so I'm on the next page now. So turn the page, and then this is a picture of the caterpillar that's smoking hookah. All right, and so this is the next chapter, which is chapter 5, and it's Alice from a caterpillar. So I'm doing this reading, you guys, because it's a requirement for one of my classes. I'm taking a children's literature class, and so we have a numerous amount of novels, well over 10. And so I'm reading this one because it's a requirement. And so I just wanted listeners to just kind of keep me focused and engaged in the reading. So feel free to comment if you have any questions. If something didn't make sense, feel free to ask that question, and I'll reach out and try to answer that question as best I can, as soon as I can. All right, so chapter 5, Alice from a caterpillar. The caterpillar and Alice looked at each other for some time in silence. At last, the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth and addressed her in a languid, sleepy voice. "Who are you?" said the caterpillar. This was not an encouraging opening for a conversation. Alice replied rather shyly, I'd hardly know, sir, just at present. At least I know who I am when I got up this morning, but I think I must have changed several times since then." "What do you mean by that?" said the caterpillar sternly. Explain yourself. "I can't explain myself. I'm afraid, sir," said Alice, "because I'm not myself, you see." "I don't see," said the caterpillar. "I'm afraid I can't put it more clearly," Alice replied very politely, "for I can't understand it myself to begin with, and being so many different sizes in a day is very confusing." "It isn't," said the caterpillar. "Well, perhaps you haven't found it so yet," said Alice. "But when you have to turn into a chrysalis, you will someday, you know, and then after that into a butterfly. I should think you'll feel a little queer, won't you?" "Not a bit," said the caterpillar. "Well, perhaps your feelings may be different," said Alice. "All I know is it would feel very queer to me." "You," said the caterpillar contemptuously, "who are you?" Which brought them back again to the beginning of the conversation. Alice felt a little irritated at the caterpillars making such very short remarks, and she drew herself up and said very gravely, I think you ought to tell me who you are first." "Why?" said the caterpillar. Here was another puzzling question, and as Alice could not think of any good reason, the caterpillar seemed to be very unpleasant of mind. She turned away. "Come back," the caterpillar called after her. I've something important to say." This sounded promising, certainly. Alice turned and came back again. "Keep your temper," said the caterpillar. "Is that all?" said Alice, swallowing down her anger as well as she could. "No," said the caterpillar. Alice thought she might as well wait, as she had nothing else to do, and perhaps after all it might tell her something worth hearing. For some minutes it puffed away without speaking, but at last it unfolded its arms, took the hookah out of its mouth again, and said, "So, you think you are changed, do you?" "I'm afraid I am, sir," said Alice. "I can't remember things as I used, and I don't keep the same size for 10 minutes together." Can't remember what things," said the caterpillar. Well, I've tried to say, how doth the little busy bee? But it all came different. Alice replied in a very melancholy voice. Repeat, you are old, Father William, said the caterpillar. Alice folded her hands and began. You are old, Father William, the young man said, and your hair has become very white. And yet you insistently stand on your feet. Do you think at your age it is right? In my youth, Father William replied to his son, I feared it might injure the brain, but now I'm perfectly sure I have none. Why, I do it again and again. You are old, said the youth, as I mentioned before, and have grown most uncommonly fat. Yet you turn a back somersault in at the door. Pray, what is the reason for that? In my youth, said the sage, as he shook his gray locks. I kept all my limbs very supple by the use of this ointment. 1 shilling the box. Allow me to sell you a couple. So I'm a little confused with what's happening. I know Alice returned back to the caterpillar, and Alice is like, I can't remember things as I used, and I can't keep the same size. And then the caterpillar was like, you can't remember what things. And then she said, well, I've tried to say, how doth the little busy bee, but it all come different. Alice replied in a very, very melancholy voice. And then the caterpillar said, you are old, Father Williams. So the caterpillar basically told her, like, you're old, Father Williams. And so she started to act like that. She started to act like old Father Williams. And she started to talk as if she was him. So that's what kind of threw me a loop. But that's what happened. So it says, you are old, said the youth, and your jaws are weak for anything tougher than soup. Yet you finished the goose with the bones and the beak. Pray, how did you manage to do it? In my youth, said his father, I took the law. I argued each case with my wife, and the muscular strength which it gave to my jaws. He lasted the rest of my life. You are old, said the youth. One would hardly suppose that your eyes was as steady as ever. Yet you balance an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so awfully clever? I have answered these questions, and that is enough, said his father. Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs. So these are pictures. I don't know if you can see. Okay. Feel free to say hello right in the chat if you're tuning in. So it says, that is not right, said the caterpillar. Not quite right, I'm afraid, said Alice timidly. Some of the words have got altered. It is wrong from beginning to end, said the caterpillar decidedly, and there was silence for some minutes. The caterpillar was the first to speak. What size do you want to be? It asked. Oh, I'm not particularly any size, Alice hastily replied. Only one doesn't like changing so often, you know. I don't know, said the caterpillar. Alice said nothing. She had never been so much contradicted in all her life before. She felt that she was losing her temper. Are you content now? Said the caterpillar. Well, I should like to be a little larger. Sir, if you wouldn't mind, said Alice, 3 inches is such a wretched height to be. So she's 3 inches, not two. She's 3 inches now. It is a very good height indeed, said the caterpillar angrily, rearing itself upright as it spoke. It was exactly 3 inches height. But I'm not used to it, pleaded poor Alice in a piteous tone. And she thought to herself, I wish the creatures wouldn't be so easily offended. You'll get used to it in time, said the caterpillar. And it put the hookah to its mouth and began smoking again. This time, Alice waited patiently until it chose to speak again. In a minute or two, the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth and yawned once or twice and shook itself. Then it got down off the mushroom and crawled away into the grass, merely remarking as it went, one side will make you grow taller, and the other side will make you grow shorter. One side of what? The other side of what? Thought Alice to herself. Of the mushroom? Said the caterpillar, just as if it had asked it aloud, and in another moment it was out of sight. So I'm going to pause right there because I'm uncomfortable. So I'm just going to move probably to my original location or maybe even like to my desk. So excuse me because my butt hurts on this floor. Just going to move my chair. Oh, this feels so much better. Sorry about that. My butt hurts. All right. Oh, so much pain. So now I am on chapter 6. And so I think am I on chapter 6? I might have missed a page. I don't think I'm not on chapter 6 yet. Almost. So on one side of what? The other side of what? Thought Alice to herself. Of the mushroom, said the caterpillar, just as if she had asked it aloud, and in another moment it was out of sight. Alice remained looking thoughtfully at the mushroom for a minute, trying to make out which sides were the two sides of it. And as it was perfectly round, she found this a very difficult question. However, at last she stretched her arm round it as far as they would go, and broke off a bit of the edge with each hand. And now, which it was, she said to herself, and nibbled a little off the right bit to try the effect. The next moment she felt a violent blow beneath her chin, and it struck her foot. She was a good deal frightened by this very sudden change, but she felt that there was no time to be lost, as she was shrinking rapidly. So she set to work at once to eat some of the other bit. Her chin was pressed so closely against her foot that there was hardly room to open her mouth. But did it at last and managed to swallow a morsel of the left hand bit. "Come, my hand's free at last," said Alice in a tone of delight, which changed into alarm in another moment when she found that her shoulders were nowhere to be found. All she could see when she looked down was an immense length of neck, which seemed to rise like a stalk out of the sea of green leaves and lay far below her. "What can all that green stuff be?" said Alice. "And where have my shoulders gone to? And oh, my poor hands! Now is it I can't see you?" She was moving about them as she spoke, but no result seemed to follow, except a little shaking among the distant green leaves, and there seemed to be no chance of getting her hands up to her head. She tried to get her head down to them, and was delighted to find that her neck would bend about easily in any direction, like a serpent. She had just succeeded in curving it down into a graceful zigzags, and was going to dive in among the leaves, which she found to be nothing but the tops of the trees under which she had been wandering, when a sharp hiss made her draw back in a hurry. A large pigeon had flown into her face and was beating her violently with its wings. "Serpent!" screamed the pigeons. "Now, not a serpent." And Alice indignantly, "Let me alone." "Serpent, I say again," repeated the pigeon, but in the more subdued tone, and added with a kind of sob, "I've tried every way, but nothing seems to suit them." "I haven't the least idea what you're talking about," said Alice. "I've tried the roots of trees. I've tried the banks. I've tried the hedges," the pigeons went on, without attending to her. "But those serpents, there's no pleasing them." Alice was more and more, more and more puzzled. Alice is more and more puzzled, but she thought there was no use of saying anything more till the pigeon had finished. "As if it wouldn't trouble enough hatching the eggs," said the pigeon. "But I must be on the lookout for serpents, night and day. Why, I hadn't had a wink of sleep these 3 weeks. I'm very sorry you've been annoyed," said Alice, who was beginning to see its meaning. "And just as I take the highest tree in the woods," continued the pigeon, raising its voice to a shriek, "and what I was thinking, I should be free of them at last. They must needs come wiggling down from the sky. Ah, serpent! But I'm not a serpent, I tell you," said Alice. I'm a, I'm a, well, what are you?" said the pigeon. "I can see you're trying to invent something. I'm a girl," said Alice, rather dumbfounded, doubtfully, as she remembered the number of changes she had gone through that day. A likely story indeed," said the pigeon in a tone of deepest contempt. "I've seen a good many little girls in my time, but never one with such a neck like that." No, no, you're a serpent, and there's no use of denying it. I suppose you'll be telling me next time you never taste an egg. You never tasted an egg. I have tasted eggs, certainly, said Alice, who was a very truthful child. But little girls eat eggs quite as much as serpents do, you know. I don't believe it, said the pigeons. But if they do, why then they are a kind of serpent. That's all I can say. There was such a new idea to Alice that she was quite silent for a minute or two, which gave the pigeon the opportunity of adding, You are looking for eggs. I know that well enough. And what does it matter to me whether you are a little girl or a serpent? It matters a good deal to me, said Alice hastily, but I'm not looking for eggs. And as it happens, and if I was, I shouldn't want yours. I don't like them raw. Well, be off then, said the pigeon in a sulky tone as it settled down again into its nest. Alice crouched down among the trees as well as she could, for her neck kept getting entangled among the branches, and every now and then she had to stop and untwist it. After a while, she remembered that she still held the piece of mushroom in her hands, and she set to work very carefully, nibbling the first at one and then at the other, and growing sometimes taller and sometimes shorter until she had succeeded in bringing herself down to her usual height. It was so long since she had been anything near the right size that it felt quite strange at first, but she got used to it in a few minutes and began talking to herself as usual. Come, there's half my plan done now. How puzzling all these changes are. I'm never sure what I'm going to be from one minute to another. However, I've got back to my right size. The next thing is to get into that beautiful garden. How is that to be done, I wondered. As she said this, she came suddenly upon an open place with a little house in it about 4 feet high. Whoever lives there, thought Alice, it'll never do to come upon them this size. Why, I should frighten them out of their wits. So she began nibbling at the right hand bit again and did not venture to go near the house till she had brought herself down to 9 inches high. So now she brought herself down 9 inches high. So it said that she was like her original height, and which is strange because she had anticipations on going inside of the garden. But from my understanding, the garden was like on the other side of the door, and like she was too small to fit through the door. So I guess the garden itself may have been like the right size, but the only way to get to it was to be small. So yeah. um, let's see. So now I'm on chapter 5, and it's called Pig and Pepper. For a minute or two, she stood looking at the house and wondering what to do next, when suddenly a footman in livery came running out of the wood. She considered him to be a footman because he was in livery or livery. Otherwise, judging by his face only, she would have called him a fish, and rapped loudly at the door with his knuckles. It was opened by another footman in livery, with a round face and large eyes like a frog, and both footmen. Alice noticed had powdered hair that curled all over their heads. She felt very curious to know what it was all about and crept a little way out of the wood to listen. The fish footman began by producing from under his arm a great letter nearly as large as himself, and this he handed over to the other, saying in a solemn tone, "For the Duchess, an invitation from the Queen to play croquet." The frog footman repeated in the same solemn tone, only changing the order of the words a little. "From the Queen, an invitation for the Duchess to play croquet." Then they both bowed low and their curls got entangled together. Alice laughed so much at this that she had to run back into the wood for fear of their hearing her. And when the next peeped out, the fish footman was gone, and the other was sitting on the ground near the door, staring rapidly up into the sky. Alice went timidly up to the door and knocked. "There's no sort of use in knocking," said the footman, "and that for two reasons. First, because I'm on the same side of the door as you possibly hear you, and certainly there was a most extraordinary noise going on within, a constant howling and sneezing, and every now and then a great crash, as if a dish or kettle had been broken to pieces." "Please then," said Alice, "how am I to get in? There might be some sense in your knocking," the footman went on, without attending to her, "if we had the door between us. For instance, if you were inside, you might knock, and I tell you, out you now, and I could let you out, you know." He was looking up into the sky all the time he was speaking, and this Alice thought decidedly uncivil. "But perhaps he can't help it," he said to herself. "His eyes are so very nearly at the top of his head, but at any rate he might answer questions. How am I to get in?" she repeated aloud. "I shall sit here," the footman remarked, "till tomorrow." At this moment the door of the house opened, and a large plate came skimming out straight at the footman's head. It was just his nose, and broke in pieces against one trees behind him. "Or next day, maybe," the footman continued in the same tone, exactly as if nothing had happened. "How am I to get in?" asked Alex again, in a louder tone. "Are you to get in at all?" said the footman. "That's the first question, you know." It was, no doubt, only Alice did not like to be told so. "It's really dreadful," she muttered to herself, "the way all the creatures argue. It's enough to drive one crazy." The footman seemed to think this a good opportunity for repeating his remark, with variations. "I shall sit here," he said, "on and off, for days and days." "But what am I to do?" said Alice. "Anything you like," said the footman, and began whistling. "Oh, there's no use in talking to him," said Alice desperately. "He's perfectly idiotic." And she opened the door and went on. The door led right into a large kitchen, which was full of smoke from one end to the other. The Duchess was sitting on a three-legged stool in the middle, nursing a baby. The cook was leaning over the fire, stirring a large cauldron, which seemed to be full of soup. There's certainly too much pepper in that soup, Alice said to herself, as well as she could for sneezing. There was certainly too much of it in the air. Even the Duchess sneezed occasionally. And as for the baby, it was sneezing and howling alternately without a moment of pause. The only two creatures in the kitchen that did not sneeze were the cook and the large cat, which was lying on the hearth and grinding from ear to ear. Please, would you tell me, said Alice, a timidly, for she was not quite sure whether it was good manners for her to speak first. Why, your cat grins like that. It's Cheshire cat, said the Duchess, and that's why. Pig, she said the last word with such sudden violence that Alice quite jumped. But she saw in another moment that it was added to the baby and not to her. So she took courage and went on again. I didn't know that Cheshire cats always grin. In fact, I didn't know that cats could grin. So here's a picture of the Duchess and then the baby and the cat, and then you could see one of the cooks. Let's see. I'm looking for the cook. Do you see? There's the Duchess holding the baby, and then Alice, and then you can see the cat on the floor grinning. And all right. So it says they all can, said the Duchess, and most of them do. So he's talking about the cat grinning, basically saying that they all can and that most of them do. And then it says, I don't know of any that do. So Alice said very politely, feeling quite pleased to have got into a conversation. So you don't know much, said the Duchess. And that's a fact. So Alice did not at all like the tone of his remark and thought it would be as well to introduce some other subject of conversation. While she was trying to fix on one, the cook took the cauldron of soup off the fire and at once set to work throwing everything within her reach at the Duchess and the baby. The fire irons came first and followed a shower of saucepans, plates, and dishes. The Duchess took no notice of them, even when they hit her. And the baby was howling much already that it was quite impossible to say whether the blows hurt it or not. Oh, please, mind what you are doing, cried Alice, jumping up and down in an agony of terror. Oh, there goes his precious nose. And as an unusual large saucepan flew close by it and very much nearly carried it off. If everybody mind their own business, the Duchess said in a hoarse growl, the world will go round a deal faster than it does, which would not be an advantage, said Alice, who felt very glad to get the opportunity of showing off a little of her knowledge. Just think what would work and what just think what work it would make with the day and night. You see the earth takes 24 hours to turn round on its axis. Talking of axis, said the Duchess, chop off her head. Alice glanced rather anxiously at the cook to see if she meant to take the hint, but the cook was busily stirring the soup and seemed not to listen. So she went on again. 24 hours, I think, or it is 12. Oh dear, bother me, said the Duchess. Oh, don't bother me, said the Duchess. I never could abide figures. And what that she began nursing her child again, singing a short lullaby um, to it as she did so, and giving it a violent shake at the end every time, at the end of every line. Speak roughly to your little boy and beat him when he sneezes. He only does it to annoy because he knows it teases. Chorus, in which the cook and the baby join. Wow, wow, wow. While the Duchess sang the second verse of the song, she kept tossing the baby violently up and down, and the poor little thing howled so that Alice could hardly hear the words. I speak severely to my boy. I beat him when he sneezes, for he can thoroughly enjoy the pepper when he pleases. Choruses. Wow, wow, wow. Here, you may nurse it a bit if you like, the Duchess said to Alice, flinging the baby at her as she spoke. I must go and get ready to play croquet with the Queen. And she hurried out of the room. The cook threw a frying pan after her as she went, but it just missed her. Alice caught the baby with some difficulty, as it were a queer shaped little creature, and held out its arm and legs in all directions, just like a starfish, thought Alice. The poor little thing was snorting like a steam engine when she caught it and kept doubling itself up and straightening itself out again. So that altogether, for the first minute or two, it was as much as could, it was as she could do to hold it. As soon as she had made out the proper way of nursing, which was to twist it up into a sort of knot and think and then keep tight hold of its right ear and left foot as so as to prevent its undoing itself. She carried it out into the open air. If I don't take this child away with me, thought Alice, they're sure to kill it in a day or two. Wouldn't it be murder to leave it behind? She said the last words out loud, and a little thing grunted in reply. It had left off sneezing by this time. Don't grunt, said Alice. That's not at all a proper way of expressing yourself. The baby grunted again, and Alice looked very anxiously into its face to see what was the matter with it. There could be no doubt that it had a very turn up nose, much more like a snout than a real nose. Also, its eyes were getting extremely small for a baby. Altogether, Alice did not like the look of the thing at all, but perhaps it was only sobbing, she thought, and looked into its eyes again to see if there were any tears. No, there were no tears. If you're going to turn into a pig, my dear, said Alice seriously, I'll have nothing more to do with you. Mind now. The poor little thing sobbed again or grunted. It was impossible to say which, and they went on for some while in silence. Alice was then beginning to think to herself, now what am I supposed to do with this creature when I get home? When it grunted again, so violently that she looked down into its face in some alarm. This time there could be no mistake about it. It was neither more nor less than a pig, and she felt that it would be quite absurd for her to carry it any further. So she set the little creature down and felt quite relieved to set to see a throut away quietly into the wood. If it lay if it had grown up, she said to herself, it would have made a dreadfully ugly child, but it makes rather a homemade pig, I think. And she began thinking over other children she knew who might do very well as pigs, and was just saying to herself, if one only knew the right way to change them, would she, when she was a little startled by seeing the Cheshire cat sitting on a bough of a tree a few yards off. The cat only grinned when it saw Alice. It looked good natured, she thought. Still, it was very long. It had very long claws and a great many teeth, so she felt that it ought to be treated with respect. Cheshire Puss, she began rather timidly, as she did not at all know whether it would like the name. However, it only grinned a little wider. Come, it's pleased so far, thought Alice, and she went on. Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here? That depends a good deal on where you want to get to, said the cat. I don't much care where, said Alice. Then it doesn't matter which way you go, said the cat. So long as I get somewhere, Alice added as an explanation. Oh, you are sure to do that, said the cat. If only you walk long enough. Alice felt that this could not be denied, so she tried another question. What sort of people live about here? In that direction, the cat said, weaving its right paw round, lives a hater, and in that direction, waving the other paw, lives a March hare. Visit either you like. They are both mad, but I don't want to go among mad people, Alice remarked. Oh, you can't help that, said the cat. We're all mad here. I'm mad, you're mad. How do you know I'm mad? Said Alice. You must be, said the cat, or you wouldn't have come here. Alice don't think that proved it at all. However, she went on. And how do you know that you're mad? To begin with, said the cat, a dog's not mad. You grant that, I suppose, said Alice. Well, then, the cat went on. You see, a dog growls when it's angry and wags its tail when it's pleased. Now, I growl when I'm pleased and wag my tail when I'm angry. Therefore, I'm mad. I call it purring, not growling, said Alice. Call it what you like, said the cat. Don't you play croquet with the queen today? I should like it very much, said Alice. But I haven't been invited yet. You'll see me there, said the cat, and vanished. Alice was much surprised at this. She was getting all well used to queer things happening. While she was still looking at the place where it had been, it suddenly appeared again. By the by, what becomes of the baby? Said the cat. I'd nearly forgotten to ask. It turned into a pig, Alice answered very quietly, just as if the cat had come back in its natural way. I thought it would, said the cat, and vanished again. Alice waited a little, half expecting to see it again, but it did not appear, and after a minute or two she walked on in the direction in which the March Hare was said to live. I've seen haters before, she said to herself. The March Hare will be much the most interesting, and perhaps as this is May, it won't be raving mad, at least not so mad as it was in March. As she said this, she looked up, and there was the cat again, sitting on a branch of a tree. Did you say pig or fig? Said the cat. I said pig, replied Alice. And I wish you wouldn't keep appearing and vanishing so suddenly. You make one quite giddy. All right, said the cat, and this time it vanished quite slowly, beginning with the end of the tail and ending with the grin, which remained some time after the rest of it had gone. Well, I've often seen a cat without a grin, thought Alice, but a grin without a cat, it's the most curious thing I've ever saw in all my life. She had gone much farther before she came in the sight of the house of the March Hare. She thought it must be the right house because the chimneys were shaped like ears and the roof was thatched with fur. It was so large a house that she did not like to go near till she had nibbled some more of the left hand bit of mushroom and raised herself to about 2 feet high. Even then, she walked upward towards it rather timidly, saying to herself, suppose it should be raving mad at me, raving mad after all. I almost wish I'd gone to see the hater instead. So then there's I want to say this is chapter 6. I think I just read 5. Okay, so this is chapter 7. Chapter 7 is the Mad Tea Party. So the Mad Tea Party. I'll read the Mad Tea Party and then I'll be done. So I'll stop with chapter 8. So the Mad Tea Party. So there was a table set out under a tree in front of the house, and the March Hare and the Hater were having tea at it. Dormouse was sitting between them, fast asleep, and the other two were using it as a cushion, resting their elbows on it, and talked over its head. Very uncomfortable for the Dormouse, thought Alice. Only as it's asleep, I suppose it doesn't mind. The table was a large one, but the three were all crowded together at one corner of it. No room, no room, they cried out when they saw Alice coming. There's plenty of room, said Alice indignantly, and she sat down in a large armchair at one end of the table. Have some wine, the March Hare said in an encouraging tone. Alice looked all around the table, but there was nothing on it but tea. I don't see any wine, she remarked. There isn't any, said the March Hare. Then it wasn't very civil of you to offer it, said Alice angrily. It wasn't very civil of you to sit down without being invited, said the March Hare. I didn't know it was your table, said Alice. It's laid for a great many more than three. Your hair wants cutting, said the hater. He had been looking at Alice for some time with great curiosity, and this was the first speech. You should learn not to make personal remarks, Alice said, with some severity. It's very rude. The hater opened his eyes very wide on hearing this, but all he said was, Why? Is a raven like a writing desk? Come, we shall have some fun now, thought Alice. I'm glad they've begun asking riddles. I believe I can guess that, she added aloud. Do you mean that you think you can find out the answer to it? She said the March Hare. Exactly so, said Alice. Then you should say what you mean. The March Hare went on. I do, Alice hastily replied. At least, at least, I mean what I say. That's the same thing, you know. Not the same thing a bit, said the hater. Why, you might just as well say that I see what I eat is the same thing as I see or I eat what I see. You might as well say, added the March Hare, that I like what I get is the same thing as I get what I like. You might just as well say, added the Dormouse, which seemed to be talking in its sleep, that I breathe when I sleep is the same thing as I sleep when I breathe. It is the same thing with you, said the hater, and here the conversation dropped, and the party sat silent for a minute while Alice thought over all she could remember about ravens and writing desks, which wasn't much. The hater was the first to break the silence. What day of the month is it? He said, turning to Alice. He had taken his watch out of his pocket and was looking at it uneasily, shaking it every now and then and holding it to its ear. Alice considered a little and then said, The fourth. 2 days wrong, sighed the hater. I told you butter wouldn't suit the works, he added, looking angrily at the March Hare. It was the best butter, the March Hare meekly replied. Yes, but some crumbs must have gotten in it in as well, the hater grumbled. You shouldn't have put it in with the bread knife. The March Hare took the watch and looked at it gloomily. Then he dipped it into a cup of tea and looked at it again, but he could think of nothing better to say than his first remark. It was the best butter you know. Alice had been looking over his shoulder with some curiosity. What a funny watch, she remarked. It tells the day of the month, and it doesn't tell you what o'clock it is. Why should it? Muttered the hater. Does your watch tell you what year it is? Of course not, Alice replied very readily, but that's because it stays the same year for such a long time together, which is just the case with mine, said the hater. Alice felt dreadfully puzzled. The hater's remark seemed to her to have no sort of meaning in it, and yet it was certainly English. I don't quite understand you, she said, as politely as she could. The dormouse is asleep again, said the hater, and he poured a little hot tea upon its nose. The dormouse shook its head impatiently and said without opening its eyes, "Of course, of course. Just what I was going to remark myself. Have you guessed the riddle yet?" the hater said, turning to Alice again. "No, I give it up," Alice replied. "What's the answer?" "I haven't the slightest idea," said the hater. "Nor I," said the March Hare. Alice sighed wearily. "I think you might do something better with your time," she said, "than wasting it in asking riddles that have no answers." "If you knew times as well as I do," said the hater, "you wouldn't talk about wasting it. It's him." "I don't know what you mean," said Alice. "Of course you don't," the hater said, tossing his head contemptuously. "I dare say you never spoke to time." "Perhaps not," Alice cautiously replied, "but I know I have to beat time when I learn music." "Ah, that accounts for it," said the hater. "He won't stand beating. Now, if you only keep on good terms with him, he'd do almost anything you'd like with the clock. For instance, suppose it were 9 o'clock in the morning, just time to begin lessons. You'd only have to whisper a hint to time, and round goes the clock in a twinkling. Half past one, for time for dinner. "I only wish it was," the March Hare said to itself in a whisper. "That would be grand, certainly," said Alice thoughtfully. "But then I shouldn't be hungry for it. "Not at first, perhaps," said the hater, "but you could keep it to half past one as long as you like." "Is that the way you manage?" Alice asked. The hater shook his head mournfully. "Not I," he replied. "We queered last month, just before he went mad, pointing with his teaspoon at the March Hare. "It was the great concert given by Queen of Hearts, and I had to sing, 'Twinkle, twinkle, little bat, how I wonder what you're at. Twinkle, twinkle, little bat, how I wonder what you are at.'" That song, perhaps. I've heard something like it," said Alice. "It goes on, the hater continued in this way. Up above the world you fly, like a tea tray in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle." Here the dormouse shook itself and began singing in its sleep. "Twinkle, twinkle, twinkle, twinkle," and went on so long that they had to pinch it to make it stop. "Well, I'd hardly finished the first verse," said the hater, when the queen bawled out, "He's murdering the time. Off with his head." "How dreadfully savage!" exclaimed Alice. And ever since that, the hater went on in a mournful tone. "He won't do a thing, I ask. It's always 6 o'clock now." A bright idea came into Alice's head. "Is that the reason so many things are put out here?" she asked. "Yes, that's it," said the hater with a sigh. "It's always tea time, and we've no time to wash the things between whiles." "Then you keep moving round, I suppose," said Alice. "Exactly so," said the hater. "As the things get used up." "But what happens when you come to the beginning again?" Alice ventured to ask. "Suppose we change the subject," the March Hare interrupted, yawning. "I'm getting tired of this. I vote the young lady tells us a story." "I'm afraid I don't know one," said Alice, rather alarmed at the proposal. "Then the dormouse shall. They both cried, "Wake up, Dormouse!" And they pinched on both sides at once. The Dormouse slowly opened his eyes. "I wasn't asleep," it said in a hoarse, feeble voice. "I heard every word you fellows were saying." "Tell us a story," said the March Hare. "Yes, please do," pleaded Alice. "And be quick about it," added the Hater, "or you'll be asleep again before it's done." "Once upon a time there were 3 little sisters," the Dormouse began in a great hurry, "and their names were Elsie, Lucy, and Tilly, and they lived at the bottom of a well." "What did they live on?" said Alice, who always took a great interest in questions of eating and drinking. "They lived on treacle," said the Dormouse, after thinking a minute or two. "They couldn't have done that, you know," Alice gently remarked. "They'll have been ill." "So they were," said the Dormouse, "very ill." Alice tried a little to fancy to herself what such an extraordinary way of living would be like, but it puzzled her too much, so she went on. "But why did they live at the bottom of the well?" "Take some more tea," the March Hare said to Alice very earnestly. "I've had nothing yet," Alice replied in an often tone. "So I can't take more." "You mean you can't take less?" said the Hater. "It's very easy to take more than nothing." "Nobody asks your opinion," said Alice. "Who's making personal remarks now?" the Hater asked triumphantly. Alice did not quite know what to say to this, so she helped herself to some tea and bread and butter and turned to the Dormouse and repeated her question. "Why did they live at the bottom of the well?" The Dormouse again took a minute or two to think about it and then said it was a treacle well. "There's no such thing," Alice was beginning very angrily, but the Hater and the March Hare went shh, shh, and the Dormouse sulkily remarked, "If you can't be civil, you'd better finish the story for yourself." "No, please go on," Alice said very humbly. "I won't interrupt you again. I dare say there may be one." "One indeed," said the Dormouse indignantly. However, he consented to go on. "And so these 3 little sisters, they were learning the drawer, you know." "What did they Draw, said Alice. "So they were learning to draw, you know." "What did they draw?" said Alice, quite forgetting her promise. "Treacle," said the Dormouse, without considering at all this time. "I want a clean cup. I want a clean cup," interrupted her Hater. "Let's all move one place on." He moved on as he spoke. The Dormouse followed him. The March Hare moved into the Dormouse's place, and Alice rather unwillingly took the place of the March Hare. The Hater was the only one who got any advantage from the change, and Alice was a good deal worse off than before, and the March Hare had just upset the milk jug into his place. Alice did not wish to offend the Dormouse again, so she began very cautiously. "But I don't understand. Where did they draw the treacle from?" "You can draw water out of a water well," said the Hater. "So I should think you could draw a treacle out of a treacle well." "Ah, stupid." "But they were in the well," Alice said to the Dormouse. not choosing to notice this last remark. Of course they were, said the Dormouse. Well, and this answer was so confused poor Alice that she let her Dormouse go on for some time without interrupting it. They were learning to draw. The Dormouse went on yawning and rubbing its eyes, for it was getting very sleepy, and they drew all manner of things, everything that begins with an M. Why with an M? Said Alice. Why not? Said the March Hare. Alice went silent. The Dormouse had closed its eyes by the time and was going off into a doze. But on being pinched by the hater, it woke up again with a little shriek and went on. That begins with an M, such as mousetrap, and the moon, and memory, and muchness. And you say things that are much of muchness. Did you ever see such a thing as a drawing of muchness? Really? Now you ask me, said Alice, very much confused. I don't think. Then you shouldn't talk, said the hater. This piece of rudeness was more than Alice could bear. She got up in a great disgust and walked off. The Dormouse fell asleep instantly, and neither of the others took the least notice of her going, though she looked back once or twice, half hoping that they would call after her. The last time she saw them, they were trying to put the Dormouse into a tree pot. So here's a picture here. You can see they're trying to put the Dormouse into the tree pot. And you can see the hare, which is the rabbit, and then the Dormouse. So they're trying to put the Dormouse So everything's curious today. I think I may as well go in at once. And in she went. Once more, she found herself in a long hall and close to a little glass table. Now I'll manage better this time, she said to herself as she began by taking the little golden key and unlocking the door that led into the garden. Then she was set to work nibbling at the mushroom. She had kept a piece of it in her pocket till she was about 4 feet high. Then she walked down the little passage, and then she found herself at last in the beautiful garden among the bright flower beds and the cool fountains. So the next one is I think that's chapter 8, The Queen's Croquet Ground. So now Alice is finally through the doors and she's finally in the garden. And so this is where I am going to stop. So I'll be leaving off on page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this is chapter 8 and it's page 69. So this is where I'm going to leave off. Until next time, thank you for joining and thank you so much for listening. This book is definitely an adventure. So they call it Alice's Adventure in Wonderland for a reason, and through the looking glass. So I I hope you all enjoy. Thank you for spending time with me today. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.